How are you guys doing tonight? Oh, that's terrible. Come on, guys. How's everybody doing? There we go. It's the start of AOCC. It's about to be the turn up. It's going to be awesome. So my name is Clint Smith. I'm a first-year doctoral student here at the Ed School, and I think I'm officially called the fire starter. So hopefully I'm about to start some fire. But I'm going to do a couple poems for you guys, and then we will get started and hear from Jose, and hopefully all be immensely moved by everything he has to say. So this first piece, I taught high school English outside of Washington, D.C. before I came to the Ed School. And the young woman who ended up being the valedictorian of our class was undocumented, and she ended up not getting into any of the schools that she applied to. And for me, that was my first sort of introduction to the realities of what it meant to be undocumented. And immigration is something, I don't come from a family of immigrants, and it wasn't something that was necessarily ever at the forefront of my consciousness. But a lot of my students were undocumented, and this one young student in particular, her story moved me a lot, and it had me thinking about the sort of moral incongruence that existed with regard to the opportunities that we're literally preventing so many young people like herself from having. And so this poem is for her. Every year, my students read Night by Elie Wiesel. Following completion of the novel, I assigned them the task of writing their own memoir. Maria came to America when she was 5 years old, wrote that she had to cross a river before she ever knew what it meant to swim, ran through knee-high grass as if the field were made of landmines, hid under the belly of trucks amid concrete and fertilizer so as not to leave a scent for the dogs. She did not know why she was running, but she knew that her mother cried every night for her father. She knew she was beginning to forget the outline of her daddy's face. She knew that he worked 18 hours a day just to provide them with food that they could barely find at home. She knew that he loved them and wanted to remember what it felt like to hold his daughter in his arms. But Maria was 5. She doesn't remember life in Mexico. She remembers kindergarten and sleepovers and middle school graduation. She is more American than any slice of apple pie, but that is not what we tell her. We punish Maria for just following directions, for being a child who is simply listening to her parents. We tell her parents that they are wrong for wanting a better life for their children. We tell her that a 4.0 isn't good enough. We tell Maria that college wasn't meant for girls like her. We say too much brown skin. We say too much accent. We say, where'd you come from? We say, you don't have a number, so you don't exist. It's hard to convince someone to do well in school when the law tells them that it won't matter. When you're a number before you're a face. How convenient that we forget our own history, a country of immigrants who were once told we didn't belong, an assemblage of faces simply waiting for our country to see us. Now to do one more poem and get out of your way. So the theme of this conference is the other narrative. And for me, I think that's incredibly important to sort of illuminate these untold stories and to also make sure that we illuminate for ourselves and don't conflate the circumstances from which a lot of our students and young people come from, and a lot of the issues that we're going to be discussing over the course of the next 2 days are difficult. And a lot of the people who we seek to work in solidarity with are coming from some really structurally deficient communities. But for me, it's really important that we don't conflate the deficiencies of the communities structurally with the deficiencies of people, because the people aren't deficient. And really understanding that it's really important for when we have these conversations to make sure we're using asset-based language and not deficit-based language, and that we're recognizing that we are working in solidarity with people, in partnership with people. We're not here to impose our idea of what we think change should look like in many of these communities. And instead, we're asking these people who have lived there for far longer than many of us have, how we can work with you, how we can listen to you, how we can help you. And so this poem speaks to that. When the world thinks about my students, too often they see caricatures of pity. Metaphors of misery that can do nothing for themselves. But every day I see resilience. I see boys and girls turn into young men and women right in front of my face. I see students who walk to school on street corners where policemen can make them feel more terror than talent, but they still show up for tutoring at 6:30 in the morning. So often we focus so much on the quicksand that we fail to see what has refused to drown. So when you think about my kids, don't just think about what holds them down. Think about how they overcome it every day. Think of Janiyah, who turns my classroom into a coliseum. Every word she speaks coded in creativity. Her poetry would have brought Homer to his feet. Think of Anna, who became an honor roll student when the world wanted to free and reduce lunch define her. She is more than a form. She is more than a number. Think of Chris, who has been working every day since he was 13. That money helps his mother keep the lights on so that their world isn't covered in darkness. My students have turned my classroom into a symphony of second chances. Every day we write to right the wrongs that have been done to communities that never had a choice. We read to learn how to tell our own stories because no one can define who we are if we are the ones holding the dictionaries. Don't tell me my kids aren't brilliant. Don't tell me they aren't walking miracle. My students have taught me how to relearn every part of me. I carry their stories like a back pocket full of prayer, and I leave my classroom a better person every day. So when we speak of them, let us speak of humanity. Let us speak of perseverance. Let us speak of how funny they are. Let us speak of how courageous they are. Let us not focus so much on the shadow that we fail to see what stands above it. Let us celebrate the best of our kids as we would want anyone to celebrate the best of us. Thank you, guys.
All right, thank you, Clint. Clint Smith is a teacher, poet, and doctoral candidate in education here at Harvard University. Let's give him another round of applause. Okay, so welcome to the 13th Annual Alumni of Color Conference. Woo! My name is Veronica Benavides, and I am one of the tri-chairs of AOCC 2015. The Alumni of Color Conference at the Harvard Graduate School of Education aims to inspire and transform education by convening scholars, researchers, practitioners, policymakers, and students concerned with issues of race, class, and education as they pertain to all people and in particular to communities of color. This year's conference theme, The Other Narrative, celebrating Untold Stories, will provide participants the opportunity to challenge dominant narratives that position the racial, ethnic, and cultural identities belonging to communities of color as inferior. By highlighting untold stories and counter-narratives, AOCC will engage participants in exploring different voices that celebrate just alternatives that include and go beyond academic discipline and pedagogy. At this year's AOCC, almost 600 researchers, scholars, practitioners, students, activists, and organizers will convene an exploration of educational issues impacting communities of color. In the next 2 days, we will host over 200 presenters, 80 of which are high school-aged youth, whose insights will expand our collective imagination and knowledge. Our presenters are tackling issues like racial and ethnic identity development in Black immigrant college students, the U.S. prison industrial complex, and countering stereotypes with stories. We are also excited to host 3 powerful keynote sessions. On Saturday, you will gain insight from Michelle Martin's challenge to create space for untold narratives in the realm of mainstream media. You will also hear from Reverend Uhuru Sekou, Umara Elliott, Sinead Nichols, and Niall Fort, who will move us to re-examine our own narrative in relation to the fight for racial equity. And tonight, you will be inspired by Jose Antonio Vargas and his personal narrative and passion and his fight for change for immigration reform. This promises... All right, Jose. I stumbled a little bit, but I'm really glad you're here. This promises to be a powerful weekend, and I'm glad that you're all here. We need everyone in this room and more if we're going to achieve the vision of educational equity. I would now like to hand it over to AOCC Tri-Chair Jackie Elo, who will honor our award winners for the night.
Thank you, Veronica. So tonight I have the pleasure of honoring 3 people who exemplify the other narrative celebrating untold stories. The first is our Alumni Achievement Award, which goes to Anita Wadwa. Anita is a Anita is a believer, a fighter, a dreamer, a hope filler, an activist, a facilitator, and a friend to those with untold stories. A champion for social justice, through a deep belief in restorative justice, Anita has changed lives. She is a former AOCC tri-chair and currently serves as the Restorative Justice Coordinator at the Academy of Choice, a small non-traditional high school in Houston. She is also the founder of the Restorative Justice Collaborative of Houston. She brought a large group of her students from the Academy of Choice in Houston to last year's AOCC, and I am happy to say that we have some students from AOC this year. There is a strong representation of them here, and her dissertation on race, discipline, and restorative justice in urban schools is coming out as a book this summer. She has been committed to eliminating the increasing school-to-prison pipeline through restorative justice, which can so aptly be summed up as, rather than focusing on punishment, restorative justice seeks to repair the harm done because it is, in essence, another narrative. It's a beautiful process that she has worked tirelessly to make mainstream, which is exactly what we're trying to do with this conference. She deserves recognition for the work that she does and for the person that she is. On her behalf, since she could not be here tonight, Nathaniel Vasquez, one of her students from the Academy of Choice, will accept her award on her behalf. Thank you. Additionally, we honor an HGSE student of color who demonstrates through their work commitment to educational justice in the spirit of Kalajo Paul Afolabi. At the moment of his untimely passing in fall 2011, Kalajo, EDM 10, was a doctoral student who studied higher education, a devoted friend, partner, and family member with an active membership at HGSC as well as the AOCC community. His particular commitment was to low-income, first-generation youth in their pursuit of higher education. Kalajo was determined that all young people should have the opportunity to afford and attend and graduate from college. In his honor, the Kalajo Afolabi Award for Commitment to Educational Justice recognizes the work of a current HGSE student who demonstrates Kalajo's mission to use academia as a transformative pursuit for equity with excellence. We are delighted that Kalajo's father, Dr. Afolabi, is with us tonight to celebrate this award in his son's honor. Dr. Afolabi, would you please stand? And so it is with great honor that I say that Cesar Cruz is a second-year student in the Doctor of Education Leadership program. Not only has he demonstrated his own commitment to justice in education, he is a beacon for others to look forward. He bears his soul and challenges others to look within and find love in every single human being. Cesar is the founder of Homies Empowerment, an organization that inspires youth from gang-related backgrounds to become more than gang members. He has inspired the youth of Oakland to recognize their full potential and use their influence to affect positive change upon the Oakland community. He truly exemplifies the ideas of equality and inspiring others. Cesar is not on this journey alone, though. He is accompanied by his beautiful family who is seated here in front. Cesar, please come receive your award. The 2015 Alumni of Color Conference annually awards an HGSC staff member who has demonstrated commitment to educational equity in the spirit of Tina Hansar. Christine Tina Hansar had a long and fulfilling career in student services here at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, where she was loved by students and colleagues. Specifically, she was instrumental in the successful acclimation of many students of color to HGSC environment through her kindness, compassion, and empathy for the challenges that minority students face in predominantly white institutions. She was a true advocate for student initiatives and played key roles in student-initiated events to honor the personal, political, and intellectual assets that these students bring to HGSC. In her honor, the Christine Tina L. Hansar Award for Commitment to Educational Equity recognizes the work of a current HGSC staff member who demonstrates Tina's advocacy for student-led initiatives to transform HGSC's environment and education broadly in the pursuit of equity with excellence. Tina's husband is in the audience, and I would just like to acknowledge him before we talk about the Tina Hansar Award recipient. If you could stand. Eileen Berger is the true embodiment of embracing diversity. She has been a tireless advocate within students of color spaces and in the broader HGSC community for inclusion, primarily of students with disabilities within the educational equity conversation and in AOCC. She views equality as a two-way street and strongly advocates for students of color, international students, and LGBTQ students, for all students really, to join, influence, and shape the disability student movement conversation here at HGSC. On a personal level, she often helps students negotiate the often difficult personal challenges of acknowledging their disabilities so that they know that these are not limits to their access to curriculum and to the HGSC community, but that they are an asset of difference and enriches their lives and those of others that they encounter. Always encouraging, Eileen's enthusiasm and passion extends generously to every student she has ever met. All means all for Eileen, and her efforts to hold students, staff, faculty, and herself to this lofty but attainable goal benefits all of us within the HGSC community. Eileen credits her early love of civil rights and her higher education opportunities to her family of first-generation urban Americans. Eileen is the Director for Access and Disability within the Office of Student Affairs and has been here for 12 years. Eileen is accompanied by her husband, Michael. Please come receive your award. I would now like to call up my other tri-chair, Mariska Selby. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Mariska Selby, and I'm a second-year doctoral candidate in the Doctor of Education Leadership Program here at Harvard Graduate School of Education. As one of the tri-chair officials for the 2015 conference, I want to thank you all for joining us in continuing to convene HGSC Network, both past and present, and the larger education community in meaningful and transformative dialogue. After Mr. Jose Antonio Vargas shares his story, we will invite you all to use the microphone stands. There's one in this aisle and one in that aisle. We invite you all to use the microphone stands we have set up in order to ask questions to Mr. Vargas. In the interest of fitting in as many voices, yes, many, and questions as possible, please try to keep your questions concise and ensure that all questions actually end with a question mark. Additionally, we are pleased to share that there will be a reception honoring Mr. Vargas, immediately following this talk in Gutman Conference Center. Please join us. And now I would like to introduce the Dean of Harvard Graduate School of Education and the Charles William Eliot Professor of Education, Dean James Ryan.
Okay, now I know at least I should be brief. Leave time for questions. So first of all, it's so wonderful to see all of you here. Good evening. Well, let's try that again. Good evening. Excellent. I'd like to thank Mariska and Clint for that tremendous performance. It's a very difficult act to follow. What makes the Alumni of Color Conference so special year after year is that it's the product of extraordinary effort on the part of students, faculty, and staff alike to put together not only a remarkable conference, but the single largest annual gathering of our alumni. And so to all alumni sitting in the audience, welcome back. It's great to see you. I'd like to start by thanking everyone who helped make these 2 days possible, especially the AOCC Steering Committee and the Tri-Chairs Veronica, Jackie, and Mariska, who deserve a huge round of applause. I'd also like to congratulate the AOCC award winners and give a special welcome to Carl Lobsher and Dr. Afolabi. It's great to have you here. So this is actually the 13th year of the Alumni of Color Conference. I hope that doesn't bode bad luck. It's the 13th year. Maybe we should have skipped to the 14th, from the 12th to the 14th. But I don't think it's going to be the case. During that time, it has provided consistently an invaluable opportunity to discuss issues of race, class, justice, and education. And in many ways, this conference inspired a community-wide conversation that we're having this year. I noticed last year when I started that there were no single common course at the Ed School, and I thought that in the absence of a common course, maybe we could have a common conversation. And it was really sitting at the conference last year that I started to think about maybe the conference or maybe the conversation should be about the topic of diversity. And that resulted in a community-wide conversation this year entitled Fulfilling the Promise of Diversity, which began with a collective reading of Claude Steele's Whistling Vivaldi and has continued in conversations in our classrooms, at faculty and student meetings, and at a variety of events just like this. And the hope is that it will help us more fully understand the tremendous strength of diversity and how we can put that strength to work both at HGSE and beyond. The conversation has not always been easy, nor should it be. It demands that all of us rethink some of our fundamental assumptions and open ourselves to new perspectives and ideas. And given the theme of this conference, it seems to me to fit perfectly with this year-long conversation. The theme of the other narrative, celebrating untold stories, is to me absolutely brilliant, in part because I believe deeply in the power of narratives to shape how people think and to shape and alter what they believe. I have a lot of colleagues who are phenomenally good at quantitative analysis, and I believe that numbers matter, but I believe that stories matter as well. And for too long, the dominant narrative regarding people of color has been one based on deficits, rather than strengths. One that seems too often designed to provoke pity at best or fear at worst. It seems to me time to challenge that narrative with counter-narratives that celebrate and illuminate achievements, character, fortitude, resilience, talent, and grace. Narratives that inspire respect and pride and empathy and solidarity. I'm delighted and proud that this effort will be front and center at this conference, and I hope it inspires similar efforts here and elsewhere long after the conference ends. Because I believe that narratives, as Caesar would say, like art, should comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. Given the theme of this conference, it's also fitting that our first keynote speaker is someone who has dedicated himself to telling the stories that are often not told, Jose Antonio Vargas, and it's my honor to introduce him. Jose is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, a filmmaker, and founder of the Define American campaign. In 2011, he wrote an essay for the New York Times Magazine in which he told his own heartbreaking story of living as an undocumented immigrant in America. He recounted leaving the Philippines at age 12 and being smuggled into the United States by a stranger. He conveyed what it felt like to live constantly in fear of being discovered, even during some of the most proud moments of his life. And yet, in spite of that ever-present fear, Jose decided that he was done running and came forward in perhaps the most public way possible and did so by telling his story. It's his bravery, combined with the tremendous ability he has as a storyteller, which he's displayed writing for the Washington Post, Time, and The New Yorker, which he has displayed in testifying in front of the United States Senate Judiciary Committee, which he has displayed in directing the film Documented. It's all of this that makes him such a perfect fit for this forum. It's an honor to have Jose lead tonight's conversation as we ask, how do you define American? Please join me in giving Jose Antonio Vargas a warm welcome.
The last time I spoke here was in 2010. I was actually at Harvard to profile one of your famous students, Mark Zuckerberg, for the New Yorker. So that was an incredibly different circumstance. I am very happy to be speaking here. I'm very proud to be speaking at this school, and because of that, I will take a picture of you. Smile! You understand, people still deport us every day. They don't allow us to keynote at Harvard Graduate School of Education. So, I'm supposed to talk to you about immigration, but I'm really not. I'm here to talk about Define American, which to us, to our team at Define American, is way more than about immigration. We are a media and culture organization that seeks to elevate the conversation around immigration, race, and citizenship. Immigration, race, and citizenship in a demographically changing America. I feel that it is my job, more than as a founder of Define American, but as a writer and a filmmaker, to connect the dots. When I say media, by the way, I also mean, especially these days, the me in media, which is really the me in social media, right? In this storytelling in the age of technology and diversity, with people telling their own stories, people, quote unquote, coming out, really to let people in. That to me is what social media is about. When I say culture, I mean, for us at Define American, culture is politics. So long as people call us illegal, so long as people obsess over the physical border and not examine the border in their minds, we are not going to get anywhere. And to me, the biggest challenge and opportunity in front of us is the question of who frames whose story and who tells whose narrative. And I have to say, by the way, being at this school, probably the most prestigious school of education in this country, educators have played a central role in my life. One of my favorite quotes is by the writer Graham Greene, who said, "There is a moment in every childhood when a door opens and lets the future in." in my life educators from middle school to high school, educators who didn't seem to care that this chubby little Filipino kid didn't, had a really thick accent, and that he showed up at school wearing cowboy boots and eating fish with soy sauce, and then finding out later that he didn't have papers, and there was no Dream Act, and there was no YouTube, and there was no Google, that it was the educator's job to see this kid, me, as one of their kids. That was their job. In 2000, actually, in high school, when I was a senior in high school, I co-edited the high school newspaper. And I remember writing a story mapping out how segregated my high school was. Like why the Asian kids were in one place, and the white kids were in one place, and the Latinos in one place, and the blacks in one place. And my principal, Pat Highland, handed me a book. Why are all the black kids sitting together in the cafeteria? And other conversations about race. As you can imagine, it landed like a brick in my head, top of my head. And among the many virtues of this book, it introduced me to a writer that I'd never heard of before named James Baldwin, quoted in the book, quoted as saying, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." I'm going to show you a video right now that if you haven't done so, go on YouTube, get lost in the brilliance that is James Baldwin. And this interview was from 1963.
Jim, what do you see deep in the recesses of your own mind as the future of our nation? And I ask that question in that way because I think that the future of the Negro and the future of the nation are linked.
They're indissoluble.
Yeah. Now, what do you see? Are you essentially optimistic or pessimistic? And I really don't want to put words in your mouth because what I really want to find out is what you really believe.
Well, I'm both glad and sorry you asked me that question. I'll do my best to answer it. I can't be a pessimist because I'm alive. To be a pessimist means that you have agreed that human life is an academic matter. So I'm forced to be an optimist. I'm forced to believe that we can survive whatever we must survive. But the Negro in this country, the future of the Negro in this country is precisely as bright or as dark as the future of the country. It is entirely up to the American people and our representatives. It is entirely up to the American people whether or not they're going to face and deal with and embrace this stranger whom they maligned so long. What white people have to do is try to find out in their own hearts why it was necessary to have a nigger in the first place. Because I'm not a nigger. I'm a man. But if you think I'm a nigger, it means you need it. The question you got to ask yourself, the white population of this country has got to ask itself, North and South, because it's one country, and for a Negro, there is no difference in the North and the South. There's just a difference in the way they castrate you. But the fact of the castration is the American fact. If I'm not the nigger here, and you invented him, you the white people invented him, then you got to find out why.
Well,
and the future of the country depends on that, whether or not it's able to ask that question.
Can you imagine discovering this guy when you're in high school? And just to give you some background, a few years before learning about James Baldwin, I didn't know about black or white. I came from the Philippines, and we learned to speak Tagalog. We learned to speak English. We mostly speak Tagalog by listening to Whitney Houston and Michael Jackson songs. We didn't know, I had no idea they were black until I got here. And then it was really weird being in an environment where people refer to people as black and white and then not being black or white. And then realizing that there's this N-word thing, and you're wondering, what is this N-word about and who created it? And how come kids say it to each other, but then kids can't say it it was really, really confusing. And I have to tell you, I don't know what I would have done in high school if I had not discovered James Baldwin at a time when I had just figured out that I was the faggot, that what my classmates were calling us in hallways. And I had figured out that the green card that my grandfather had given me was fake. I had to figure out, what does it mean to be this illegal alien faggot in high school? And then you listen to the brilliance of this man. The fact that for most of his life, he was the other, the quintessential other in America. And the other in America has become, demographically and culturally, all of us. And I would argue that actually James Baldwin is more relevant now than he was back then. And why am I showing you Baldwin? I am showing you Baldwin, this idea of the closet, this idea of the other narrative. For me, it took me until I was 30 years old to finally come out of the other closet in my life. I have no more closets to come out of. Or if I do, I'm not sharing it with you. And I decided that I was going to out myself in the most public way, which is the New York. Isn't that the most horrible photo you've ever seen? So that was in the New York Times magazine. And then I waited at home. I waited for somebody to contact me. I don't know, the government. I had put my stuff in storage. I had paid all of the credit cards. I had actually taken all of my money out of the bank, just in case they went after my money in the bank, and waited. Nothing happened. You know, I get invited to Colbert, and I do like interviews, and I get on Bill O'Reilly once, then, and I'm waiting, nothing happens. So then I contacted the editor of Time magazine, and I said, okay, well, I want to write a story about why they haven't deported me. And no, I'm not kidding. And so I'm a journalist. You know, reporting has always been my religion. Journalism is my church. So I called DHS, which is, I'm not sure what the vote is right now. Is it being shut down? I called DHS myself, ICE, and I said, hi, I'm Jose Antonio Vargas. I have not heard from you. What do you want to do with me? And you know, it was interesting because we filmed it as well, and because you know, I should document this. So I called them, and then when the woman said, "Wait a minute, let me put you on hold," I was like, "Okay." And then finally, I said to her, "You know, ma'am, I'm on deadline. You know, I need a comment from you." And then she says, "No comment. We cannot comment on your case." And I actually think it's a metaphor for how generally the American public thinks of us. You know we're here, right? You know we go to your schools. We shop at the same stores. We drive on the same freeway with or without our driver's license. We go to the same church, right? You know that without us, you wouldn't have lettuce and tomatoes. Who would babysit your kids? Who would mow your lawns, right? You need us as much as we need you. But no comment. No comment. So long as someone's babysitting your kids and mowing your lawns and serving you drinks, you're cool. Right? Well, it's not cool. And for me, as a journalist, I traffic in facts, right? And what has been astounding to me with the amount of coverage, especially political coverage, this issue gets, is how rarely we actually hear facts. Like this fact from the Social Security Administration that says that undocumented workers like me have paid more than $100 billion into the Social Security Fund. Vice News reported this, interviewed the head of Social Security Administration. Did Brian Williams ever report this? I don't think so. No one picked it up. Because it doesn't fit the narrative. The narrative is we're taking over, giving you Ebola and stuff, right? The narrative isn't that undocumented workers like us using fake papers are actually paying into the system. The actual narrative is, without our money into your fund, it would go bankrupt. And then you have the audacity to come around and call us illegal and say, get out of here? So that's a fact, right? The other fact, an estimated 17 million people in the United States live in households where at least one person is an undocumented immigrant. We call them mixed status families. There are 17 million Americans who live in such a family. So I'm Filipino, we're like the Italians of Asia. We have huge families. So out of like 30 cousins, nephews, aunts, he's laughing because you're from the Bay Area. You know how Filipinos are, right? Huge. So out of like 30 people in my family, I'm the only one out of 30 people who's undocumented. So do you know what happens when you like trash talk quote-unquote illegal people, my nieces, my nephews, my aunts, they vote. They're American citizens. They vote and they work. We don't know this. In the same way that we don't know that there's even undocumented Africans and Caribbeans, that undocumented Germans and British people that we never talk about. Because again, it's about Mexico. It's about Mexico, right? So for me, these are facts. But at Define American, we've done about 410 events in 45 states in about 190 colleges in almost 4 years. And I can tell you, giving talks, interviewing people, participating in panels, getting in as many uncomfortable conversations as I possibly can get myself into, I can tell you that facts are not enough. Facts are not enough. Because this is a very visceral thing. This is a thing where America is mine, man. It's not yours. America is apple pie. It's not churro. It's not your little lo mein. It's not, this is my America, and you're not in it. So we actually, through filming for 2 years, I ended up in Alabama at a time when Alabama seems to be going through yet another identity crisis of its own. This is a clip from my film Documented.
A new illegal immigration law that's said to be the toughest in the nation is on the books in Alabama.
The law will allow officials to check the immigration status of students in public schools and give the police new powers to determine whether someone is in the country illegally.
But it goes beyond the legal issue. In part, what happens next to the 4% Latinos in Alabama and to the rest of Alabama's immigrants depends on whether or not this starts being treated in Alabama as not just a demographics issue, but as a civil rights issue.
So can you tell me a little bit about how this has impacted you personally? Like, do you know people who are undocumented?
I do. I do know some people who are undocumented, and I know people who are documented, and it created a level of fear for them where, Thomas Jefferson said, you should never fear your government. The government should fear you. Where this produces.
What you sound like? Just straight up, dude. I've been hearing you all night long.
Yeah.
You sound like garbage.
So you agree with it? So you agree with the immigration? So you agree with the immigration law?
Yes, I do. Get the motherfuckers up out of here. That's what I agree with. Yeah. Bye bye. Bye bye. Get your papers or get out. That's what I agree with.
Please this way.
That's what I agree. You got your papers?
What was that?
You got your papers?
What if I told you I didn't?
Well, then you need to get your ass on then. That's what I say.
Okay.
That would be my response.
Let's go.
No, we're not going nowhere. I'm chilling. You shut up.
Quit being a shit ass.
Shut your face.
Don't embarrass me.
So you took the steps necessary to become a United States.
There's no steps.
There is a couple steps.
Like what? There's no steps, man. My mom wanted to give me, I guess, a better life. I was 12, so she sent me to live with her parents in California.
Right.
So I guess.
There you live with them.
Yeah, I lived with them. Then I found out I was illegal, and then I'm like, shit, I better speak English well, or else they're gonna think I'm illegal. I'm gonna work my ass off. Work to the Washington.
So
I've been paying my taxes since I was 18. Been paying my taxes since I was 18.
Well, good.
That's good, man.
That's great.
Thank you.
Good pictures for security.
The thing is, though, you kind of you came over here and you became a productive member of society, right? That's what you did, right?
Everybody wants to be, right? Everybody wants to be.
Everybody does. Yeah. Everybody does.
Yeah.
When you got hordes of people coming over here and they're staying 10 deep in their fucking apartment. And they're lowering down, I'm a contractor. I'm a blue-collar guy.
It's my baby.
I build houses, you know what I'm saying? When you got somebody that'll put a roof on a house for $10, you got another one that's got to do it for about $20 or $30.
I own 32 acres here.
And are you born and raised here in Alabama?
Yes, born here and raised in Alabama. I don't farm on the scale that I did at one time for the simple reason that I'm getting older. Paco is the nickname of my Latino worker, and it's a friendship, and he works with me also. I'd rather say he works with me than for me. If I go to Paco's house, his 3 children come hug me just like my grandkids come hug me. That's one of his rules. his little son,
Oh,
the
wow.
youngest one, but I've accidentally erased the others. But Latinos are scared. If they're here illegally, they're scared. If they're here legally, they've got family members that they're scared for. But the idea that if I've got Paco in a vehicle with me, then I'm liable also, and I can be arrested. Well, that's telling me who my friend, the state of Alabama, telling me who my friends can be. I'm a conservative, and I'm a hardcore Republican, but I don't agree with them on this. I think you've got an immigration problem, but this is no way of solving it.
There's a lot in that 5-minute clip. So since we're talking about the other narrative, as a filmmaker, I'm incredibly sensitive to making sure that when you portray people, you try to portray them as fully as you possibly can. The drunken guy made me really nervous for many reasons. He made me nervous because I didn't like the way he was talking to his girlfriend and wife. I wasn't sure what their relationship was. He made me nervous because the last thing I wanted to do was go to Alabama and portray white people as a bunch of racist rednecks. As somebody who's been called names my whole life, I'm not a fan of doing that. But he speaks with what he speaks. But the very end of that clip, when he says, I'm a contractor, I'm a blue-collar guy, right, was a really important part because it's true. What you don't see, because we had to cut the film, what you don't see is the conversation that happens afterwards, which is that, wait a second, so you're blaming people, like, isn't the people taking advantage of all of this are the employers, right? Why are you blaming the people who are, quote-unquote, lowering the wages, when really, we're in the South, man. Who built the South? We are a country addicted to cheap labor. Talk to black Americans who built the South for nothing. Talk to the Irish and the Chinese who built the railroads. Talk to Mexicans, by the way. When you say, put a sign in the border that says, keep out, 10 yards in, what do you say? Job wanted. Make up your mind. Do you want somebody to pay $20 to mow your lawn? Or you want what do you want? You can't have it both ways, right? And for me, the other narrative is what you rarely hear of is the farmer, Lawrence. How many times have you heard somebody like that speak of an immigrant, of an undocumented immigrant? How many other Laurens are there all around the country, of whatever party, of whatever age, of whatever background, who sees that undocumented worker as a friend? I mean, what Lauren says in like a minute and a half speaks of more humanity and complexity than anything that has ever come out of any of these Republican presidential candidates. I'm not naming any names. For us at Define American, culture is politics. We cannot change the politics of immigration until we change the culture in which we talk about immigration and undocumented people. In the social media-oriented, data-driven, personal narrative age of storytelling, we must shift the culture in using all forms of media. As an openly gay man, the LGBT rights movement is particularly instructive in the past 15 years. Can you think of LGBT rights without Ellen DeGeneres on the cover of Time magazine? Can you think of LGBT rights without Will and Grace as the #1 show on television for 6 years? Can you think of LGBT rights without realizing that for every Will, there's a Grace? Right? The friend, the coworker, the neighbor, the sister, the uncle who's gay. And how that idea of allyship and the idea of coming out humanizes what was once, and in many ways still is, a very, very political issue. Coming from the Bay Area, from San Francisco, I should say that the Gay Straight Alliance movement was born in 1999 when I was a junior in high school, the same year that Will and Grace aired for the first time on NBC. It is not an accident that had happened at the exact time. So for us to help grow this movement and attract new allies, we are using all forms of media to change culture. There are many definitions of power, but to me, power is a group's ability to define reality. Power is a group's ability to define reality. And looked at that prism, undocumented people in this country don't really have a lot of power. With the way the media talks about us, with the way politicians use us as pawns so they can win elections and make you scared of us. So it's been really important for us at Define American and for me as a storyteller to claim space, to claim the things they don't think belong to us, like the word American, like the American flag, like the Pledge of Allegiance. Using Toni Morrison and James Baldwin, Sandra Cisneros, and many other writers who have been collectively disrupting the master narrative in American culture. Our job at Define American is to disrupt the culture in which you think of us. So last year, actually, to promote the pledge symbol, I know that you're going to go to defineamerican.com tonight, and you're going to see the pledge symbol. To promote this, I directed a PSA that actually got covered in both Good Morning America and Fox News, I'm very proud to say. And this features 20 undocumented people pledging allegiance to the flag.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag
of the United States of America
and to the republic
for which it stands,
one nation,
under God,
indivisible,
with liberty and justice
for all.
for all.
I was born in Mexico City,
Kolkata, India,
Honduras,
Nairobi, Kenya,
Philippines,
Lima, Peru,
Rosario, Argentina.
I work as a housekeeper,
college student,
math teacher,
congressional intern,
aspiring biochemist.
I've been in the United States for over 25 years.
24 years.
13 years.
This is the place where I became who I am. This is the place I grew up, and I understand the meaning of giving, of making a change.
Pledging allegiance to a flag that has not yet recognized me means living in fear.
Shows me how much work there is left to do.
When I see the American flag, the first word that comes to mind
is pride,
dreams,
health,
heart, patriotism,
unity,
liberty and freedom and many opportunities. Yeah.
Pledging allegiance means I am a part of America.
It's a small yet meaningful way to show that I am an American.
I may not have been born in America, but America was born in me.
How do you define American?
How do you define American?
How do you define American?
Take the pledge.
Join us at defineamerican.com.
This is really interesting because the moment we launched this, I heard from a couple of friends who are producers, I will not name the network, who said, "What are you doing with that woman with her accent butchering the Pledge of Allegiance?" Then I heard from a funder, which I will not name, one of our funders at Define American, who, our job is to push each other, right? One of the funders who's a progressive, a proud progressive, says, "What are you doing wrapping these immigrants in red, white, and blue? It's too patriotic." Too patriotic. That's when I knew I did my job, when I kind of made both sides uncomfortable. Because to me, we knew that we did our job when I emailed this video to Mark Meckler, the co-founder of the Tea Party Patriots, the largest gathering of Tea Party members, and he said he cried because he had never seen immigrants like this before. Now, what was interesting for me, again, about claiming something, we didn't coach any of them to say any of that. We simply asked questions. And I wanted people to claim something, right? Because that woman, by the way, her name is Ingrid. She's been a housekeeper for 15, 16 years, right? Proud, Virginian. She considers herself an American. That young woman that says that this is where she's become who she is, she's one of the 10 young Virginian students who sued the state of Virginia for not giving in-state tuition to undocumented students and won. When I think of America, I think of them. And what's interesting, though, is that you have seen this movement of undocumented people like me coming out. But we're not really only the ones coming out. Our friends, our neighbors, our teachers, our classmates, they're coming out, right, of their support for us. A couple of weeks after I outed myself as undocumented, when the Associated Press still uses the term illegal immigrant, thanks to Define American, they no longer do that. There was an article, and this is my high school principal, the same principal that gave me that book, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? The same principal, when I told her I was undocumented, she was like, "I don't really know what that means, but we're going to figure this out." She was the one that got me a college scholarship that sent me to college for 4 years for free. She was my first phone call when I found out that I had won this Pulitzer thing, and then wondering, wait, aren't they going to find out that the Social Security number was fake? Are they going to take it back? What are they going to do? She was the first phone call I made when the Washington Post offered me an internship. And I said to her, "Pat, aren't I taking somebody else's spot?" Because, that's what we're told to think, right? And then Pat says, "What are you talking about? You earned this, you should go. So how many other Pat Hylands are out there waiting to come out? How many other educators like Clint? If you have not seen the video of Clint talking about his undocumented student that like went viral and Upworthy, check it out. How many other people, how many other teachers, how many other superintendents, how many other college presidents do we need to come out and say, these are our kids? Can you imagine what would happen if the president of Harvard University actually publicly said, we welcome undocumented students at Harvard University? What would happen? And individually and collectively, our coming out is tied to the story of America, where minorities like us are really not minorities. I actually declare independence from that term, minority. I'm only a minority to you. I'm a majority to me, right? Who find the word underprivileged terribly incomplete, who don't want to be considered non-white, because white was never the default and was never the norm. White doesn't exist. Which actually brings us to the project that we've been working on, Define American. Right now I'm directing a film, we're almost done, a film for MTV on what it means to be young and white in America. My fascination from middle school has finally come to MTV. And you really have to give credit to the MTV president, who doesn't seem to be scared of the fact that he's giving this film to an undocumented gay Filipino American who majored in African American studies and political science in college. And this idea of what is white, this question of when did Americans become white? Like, when did that happen? What do immigrants then and now, even before Ellis Island, what did they have to do with being white? Of course, as I always do, I turn to this living woman, living icon named Toni Morrison to give us some insight to this. This is from an interview in 1990 that I recently discovered maybe 5 years ago on YouTube. God, I love YouTube.
To make an American, you had to have all of these people from these different classes, different countries, different languages, feel close to one another. So what does an Italian peasant have to say to a German burgher? And what does an Irish peasant have to say to a Latvian? You know, really, they tended to balkanize. But what they could all do is not be black. So it is not coincidental that the second thing every immigrant learns when he gets off the boat is that word, nigger. In that way, he's establishing oneness, solidarity, and union with the country. That is the marker. That's the one.
What kind of need did that meet in the psyche, do you think?
Well, these were people who were frightened. I mean, I would be. You go to a strange country, maybe you have some friends there, you need a job, you've cut your bridges, you said something's terrible back home, you go and you immigrate, you go someplace else. And if it's under duress, you're facing chaos. And when you're facing chaos, you have to name it or violate it or control it in some way. So you want to belong to this large idea. You want to belong. And one learns very quickly what to belong to.
Did you get all of that? If you go on YouTube, there's 45 minutes of this. I highly recommend watching the whole thing. It's been very instructive for us. This was when MTV announced that I was directing this film, which is going to be a project of Define American as well. There was a lot of anxiety about what is Jose going to do with this film. The term white privilege gets thrown around a lot. I don't know what I think of that phrase. I understand what it means. Clearly, I understand what it means. But, you know, having interviewed and spoken to a lot of lower middle class white people, especially in the South and in the Midwest, who don't think they're privileged at all, right? Who feel that their America got taken away from them by Barack and Michelle and Jay-Z and Beyonce and Jeremy Lin and Jennifer Lopez, who feels that some train has left the station and they're not on it, right? In the same way that I seek empathy, they also need empathy, trying to figure out why they think what they think and why they believe what they believe. and this question of, again, whiteness. If slavery was our country's original sin, which it is, the original lie was black and white. That's the original. And now, when Latinos are the largest minority group, and Asians are the fastest growing racial group, how do we talk about race beyond black and white? How do we talk about race and tie it to immigration, which is tied to the very founding of this country? And where do Native Americans fit in this whole thing? So for the Whiteness Project, we picked 5 characters, young white Americans who were going through some journey. One of whom is a young guy who grew up in North Dakota who decides to join Teach for America to teach at a Native American reservation. We found him, followed him there. Can you imagine standing in front of a room full of Native American kids teaching U.S. history, using a book that was approved that doesn't necessarily represent Native Americans in the most positive light? And I remember being in that class, because we filmed the class, and I ended up asking one of the women there, young students, I said, well, when did European settlers become white? She turned around and she said, when they started calling us Redskins. That same woman, after we were filming, you have to unpack and get your equipment out. She pulls me aside and she said, oh, I know who you are. I'm like, oh, thanks. No, I've watched your stuff on, I've seen you on some shows and stuff. It's about time that you came here. You talk about immigration all the time. You talk about black civil rights all the time. You talk about gay civil rights all the time, but you never seem to want to talk about us. So I'm really, really happy that you're here. She called me out. She was right. How dare I actually ask permission from Republicans in Congress when the very people I should be asking permission for are Native Americans? And when this question of white privilege comes up, I think of 3 questions. Where did you come from? How did you get here? And who paid? Where did you come from? How did you get here? Who paid? So we were filming a young white student in the South. I will not name the state yet because MTV might get mad at me because you all are streaming this. Who's gay, openly gay, and decides to enroll himself at a historically black college. Talk about the New South. And for the first time in his life, is the minority in an environment of black students. And he decides to host a dinner party, introducing for the first time his black classmates to his white friends. We filmed it. Pretty fascinating. At one point in the filming, I started asking, where are you from? How did you get here? These questions, right? One of the girls, a white woman, said, oh, we're from Italy, proud Italians. One of the black women sitting across from her started looking at me saying, I don't know where I'm from. Because when we got here, we were slaves. I've had a couple of genealogy studies done, and they can't tell me where I'm from. A few months ago, we showed documented in North Carolina, in front of a predominantly African-American crowd, a woman came up to me and said, it's really fascinating hearing you and watching the film, and you talk about how your life is defined and limited by pieces of papers. And then she said, my great-great-grandmother came to South Carolina, landed in a boat, came here, and was given a piece of document that said she was a slave. A piece of document, a bill of sale. So can you connect those 2 things? The fact that you need papers to be an American and the fact that my great-great-grandmother was given a paper to say that she was a slave. I looked at her, I probably did one of my eyebrow things because I was just like, what are you telling me? I can't. And then when I got home to the hotel where I live these days, I've always known, right? We've always known that no one wishes to be a slave. We've always known that people are more than pieces of papers. So what is this really about? What is it really about? I'm 34 now, which I guess is still kind of young. I haven't seen my mother in about 22 years this coming August. I have been to pretty much everywhere in America, but I cannot leave because there would be no guarantee that I'd be allowed back. There are days when I tell myself, why am I staying in a country that doesn't want me? You know, I want my life to start, yo. You know, like I want to see Canada where they filmed Anne of Green Gables. It's like one of my favorite things when I was a kid. I really want to see South Africa, you know, what Mandela had to endure. I want to see China and what's happening with China and the fact that it's Beijing becoming the story of the 21st century. I want to see these things. And then I'm thinking, if I leave, because I'm privileged enough to say, you know what? I can write, I can make films, I can like define humanity instead of defining American, right? But what would that say to people like Frederick Douglass? What would that say to somebody like Franklin Kameny, the godfather of the gay rights movement, who like got in front of the White House in a three-piece suit in the 1950s and said, equal rights for homosexuals? What would that say to somebody like, Diane Nash? What would that say to all these people that had to fight for an America that they believe in? What would that say to people who knows that America is way more than a piece of paper and way more than any kind of definition, because America is something you fight for? The question now, I think, in front of all of us is, are we willing to fight it together? Are we willing to connect these dots? And are we willing to see each other in the fullest possible way we can? When we ask the question of defining American, we're asking the disruption of the very constitution that this country was built on. So, where did you come from? How did you get here? Who paid? Circling back to James Baldwin, I had no idea how much the death of Maya Angelou would actually hit me, because when I was a kid, I read everything she wrote. And I recently learned that her favorite quote of Jimmy Baldwin was this: "Your crown has already been bought and paid for. Your ancestors already gave it up for you. It's already possible. Now you can love yourself. Your crown has already been bought and paid for. I am here because my teachers, my grandparents, my mother, all of these people paid for it. And I'm just hoping to kind of pay it forward. Perfectly knowing where I come from, and perfectly knowing that I am a walking uncomfortable conversation, and my job is to make all of us a little more uncomfortable. I actually think the problem is we've gotten way too comfortable. Thank you very much for this incredible honor. Thank you. Okay, questions. Oh, sit down. Questions. Oh, thank you. Please sit. You're making me nervous. Sit. Okay, let's ask uncomfortable questions. There's mics. And while you're sitting there with your iPhones, you might want to follow Define American on Twitter. That's good. Nobody wants to ask me a question. Really? Clint, you got a question? Let's warm him up, man. Like you were the fire dude that like warmed people up. So let's warm them up. I don't know. Are you scared? Don't be scared. Oh, ma'am, there's a mic. Please ask. And Clint, I'm waiting on a question from you. Okay.
Thank you so much. I don't know if this. Thank you so much for all of this. I mean, it's huge. And
oh, thank you.
You've put this ball rolling kind of like a snowball that then just gets bigger and bigger, and I appreciate that. My question to you is, I connect the piece of we need you, but we don't want you.
Yeah.
And I connect it to the stories that you tell. I connect it to my own experience as an immigrant, and I connect it to the school-to-prison pipeline and to the prison industrial complex. So I wonder how much of this you feel is tied to a capitalism that without um, being checked by, values is really corroding our democracy as
You're
we know
asking me
less.
that question at Harvard.
I would say.
No. Let me just, one thing that I only had 40 minutes to speak, and so I just didn't want to go. I skipped through a whole section in my speech about colonialism. I always get, I have to write a book, which is like a year due, and like I've finished my film. I signed up for this. I just haven't had time. But there's a chapter in the book where I literally deconstruct where my name comes from. Like, because people look at me, they think Joey Chang. They don't necessarily think Jose Antonio Vargas, right? And it's funny because I never really pronounced my name Jose Antonio Vargas until I outed myself as undocumented, because all the Latinos are like, Jose Antonio. I'm like, who are they talking to? I'm like, why do they saying my name like that? I've always said my name Jose Antonio Vargas, like a gringo, right? Why? Because after the Spanish left the Philippines, America came. And we were the first U.S. territory, right? That's why Filipinos are a little bit confused. We had 300 years of, Catholicism, and the Spanish, and then the Americans came, and the Japanese came, and everybody left. So when people ask me why, I've had people ask me, why are there are 4 million Filipinos in America? We're the third largest immigrant group. Manny Pacquiao, RuPaul's Drag Race, a lot of Filipinos in that show. When I was once in Alabama, somebody asked me, why are there so many of you here? And all I could really tell him is, we are here because you were there. That's why we're here, right? That kind of answers to your question of, what does U.S. foreign policy and U.S. trade agreements have to do with migration patterns? Why do people move, right? I would argue that the force, the push-pull of what did we do? I mean, it was really, for me, astounding this past summer, what happened in Texas, what happened with the border crisis with the kids. Right? Why are these kids coming here? What happened to their countries in Central America, and what did the United States have to do with what was happening in those countries? And for us at Define American, we are directly connecting the dot between immigration and race, because we must. I ended up getting arrested in Texas this past summer. I was put in a cell for half the time when they didn't know what to do with me. They're like, what are we going to do with him? I don't know. Half the time, they put me in a cell with those kids. Mostly boys, 7 maybe to 12-year-old boys. And I remember sitting there, because, whenever they called my name, Jose Vargas, they all would look at me, and I'm like, no hablo español, Like, that's when I really realized I have to speak Spanish. And I'm looking at these kids, and all I thought was, man, this is how far we've gotten in this country. If it was one thing to call the guys at Home Depot and call them a bunch of illegals, right, while you hire them, it's a whole other thing to look at these kids and say they're illegals and ask that they be sent back home. I still cannot believe that Hillary Clinton, a fantastic individual in my mind. I've covered Hillary when I was at the Washington Post. I think she's incredibly, I can only imagine what she must go through. But I remember when she gave an interview this past summer, and she said those kids needed to be sent back home. Hillary Clinton, that has built her career on children's rights, send them back. No, if these kids were from Canada, would we have given them Celine Dion CDs and send them, like a free ride to Disney World? Like, what would we? You cannot separate race from this conversation. And you cannot separate U.S. foreign policy and U.S. trade agreements to this whole issue. I don't want to sound like the economist, but these are facts that I don't think we've faced. So, thank you for that question. Yes.
Thank you for being here. I'm also a graduate of San Francisco State, and I'm curious what impact being at San Francisco State and the College of Ethnic Studies had on you, and how important was that?
Man, it was I was really lucky because San Francisco State didn't ask for papers. They didn't care what my status was. And when I went to college there, it was $850 a semester. Do you remember that time? 8 plus books, right? And I found out, I had majored in journalism, was my major as a freshman, and then I was assigned to Philadelphia to cover cops for the Philadelphia Daily News, and an Asian guy in a Italian black town was what is this place? And when I went back to San Francisco State, I declared political science and African American studies my major. the College of Ethnic Studies in San Francisco State was actually really unique. It's the first College of Ethnic Studies in the country in 1969, before Harvard, before Princeton, before Yale had African American Studies. San Francisco State, where I came from, had it. And to me, what was most interesting about it and what was so useful about it was that college was treated. It wasn't like a stepchild, because it was a minority majority college, right? And people of color, I think, had the agency, felt the agency, right, to kind of be in charge of their own education. For me, it was very instructive when I had to cover Barack Obama in Iowa, because most political reporters are white. And it was really interesting having a conversation with political reporters about, I remember, I'm not going to name names. I remember there was a political reporter who said, Bill Clinton is the first black president, right? That's why Hillary is in the lead in South Carolina. He said this in front of like 10 of us over dinner. And I remember looking at him saying, and no offense to Ralph Nader voters. I think Ralph Nader is, he's his own man, he's great, and all that. But I said in the dinner, African Americans are not, black voters are not Ralph Nader voters. Like they actually had to fight for the right to vote, right? And they're not gonna, because at that time, Hillary Clinton was still ahead in South Carolina. And the rationale for that, it wasn't until Barack Obama won Iowa and black people realized that white people could elect Barack Obama, that Barack Obama started leading in South Carolina. But the narrative among mostly white political reporters, right, was that Bill Clinton was the first black president. So therefore, Hillary Clinton was considered more credible than Barack Obama in South Carolina. How asinine is that? But whatever. But for me, it was incredibly useful to know that. And having studied that now, I question, why don't we hear about Fannie Lou Hamer and James Baldwin in history books in high school? Right? Why did I have to wait to major in African American studies to hear the names of these people? Right? That's a big problem. And I'm sure you hear about the books that are getting banned all across the country when Arizona decides to become the new Alabama. But I'm going to just leave it at that before I get in trouble. Yes?
Hi. So as my high school's own token gay Pinay kid, I have looked up to you for years. And I cry every time. Now.
Don't cry.
No, in a great way, cry in a good way. Every time I see a video of a woman with my mother's accent in front of the flag, claiming space, and that is what keeps me fighting. Tamp it down. And just, you talk about America as this concept worth fighting for, and I guess I want to ask you, what keeps you fighting?
I don't really know any other way, right? And I'm a man. If I were a woman, this would be a bigger fight. This is the way I'm going to answer your question. Because I have the privilege at Define American, we end up speaking sometimes to mostly white audiences, right? Some in conservative areas. We did an event at Miami University where Paul Ryan went to college. Showed the film in front of 500 kids. It was really interesting. And then afterwards, the whole conversation with the kids was, how many people here are American citizens? And all of them raised their hands. And I say to them, can you please not take it for granted? If all I could do, if there's one thing we can accomplish, which is to remind Americans what it is to be an American, that's it, to me. More personally, I fight because my crown has already been bought and paid for. My grandfather saved $3,500 for a security guy who was making like $8 an hour. It's a lot of money to smuggle his grandson here and make sure that he had all the ice cream he could have and all the Pop-Tart stuff. He would sit me in front of Frasier and Cheers. I never had ice cream in the Philippines until it was someone's birthday. We have ice cream. I never knew that you could go to the grocery store and get those Neapolitan tubs. My grandfather would buy me those tubs, and he would just sit me in front of the TV. Here, learn English. So that's why I fight, and I fight because I think for me, being in places like Alabama and Mississippi is kind of unreal. You look at the faces of older African American men and women, the foot soldiers that knew what it was to really fight. And you wonder, if they fought for it, how can you not? Right? So that's why. That's why we fight. So, yes.
Hi. So my name is Sterling, and I'm from Hawaii. It's first a provocation and then a question.
Ooh, yay.
The provocation is you need to come to Hawaii and be there for a little bit.
There's a lot of Filipinos there.
There are
Yes.
a lot of Filipinos. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, how do you connect what it means to be American and what it means to be undocumented with the sovereignty movements that are currently taking place in Hawaii, like active struggle?
Can you explain to them what's happening with the
so
sovereign-
basically, Hawaii is illegally occupied. It was overthrown slightly over 100 years ago, which is not very far at all. My grandparents can kind of remember a time briefly after that. My great-grandparents arrived as plantation laborers shortly before that. And there are currently a number of sovereignty movements in Hawaii fighting for recognition from the federal government, and whether that means a separate state or the kind of relationship that the Native American tribes have is still up for debate and an open question.
What do you think about it?
That's a good turn, pushing it back on
I'm
me.
a journalist, man. Sorry.
Well, I think that what it means to be an American can be determined in that space, in saying what it means to not be an American, perhaps, or what it means to break away from a definition of American that's very much been imposed on Native people, on forced immigrants, and on all these other groups.
I guess when I say American, when Baldwin says, I cannot be a pessimist because I am alive. Believe me, man, every day I pray for two things: to not get snarky and humility. So I understand that. And don't get me wrong, there's sometimes parts of me when I can't wait to see the Philippines, because so much of what the Philippines is now, and the Philippines is a country of 110 million people. It's one of the top 12 most populous countries in the world, and our history is so tied up to American history. You know that, right? I mean, the joke in Asia is you're not going to find more Americans than Filipinos, that we are more Americans than Americans, which I find really, really fascinating, because what that says about remnants of colonialism, right, and what that says about who we think we are. But I believe, naive as it may sound, I believe in the positivity of America. I believe, and that's why I think we are the greatest experiment that this world had ever seen. And I'm not saying that as some sort of American exceptionalism, right? But I do believe that that America is exceptional because everybody is in America. That to me is what makes us. That's why I think fighting for immigration reform is so important, to kind of keep that. But this quote of facing our own history, that I have to tell you, by the way, as somebody who's been traveling nonstop, I am amazed at just the level of self-denial our country is in when it comes to our own history. And I actually think we have an opportunity right now to face it fully, to say that Black Lives Matter is connected to Muslim Lives Matter, right? To say that immigrant rights is connected to income inequality, right? To say that, as an Asian person, I am not your model minority. Can you quit that? Quit it. In the same way that I want to, let's liberate Black women from being called angry Black women, right? Like those things are all connected. And the problem, I think, is the media separates it. That doesn't answer your question. I don't really have a good answer to your question, but that's as good as I can get. Okay, thanks. Yes.
Hi, my name is Mickey. I'm from the John D. O'Brien High School.
Oh, where is that?
It's in Roxbury.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I'm kind of nervous, so bear with me.
Why are you nervous?
I just get nervous. So you spoke about, spoke on James Baldwin and, the concept of being white. And I was reminded of an essay that I read about from him, and written in 1984. It says being white and other lies, and he touches upon like what you touch upon about on race and what it means to be white, and he actually claims there is no such thing as white culture or white society, and white culture or white community. and I wanted to know what you're like thinking or what your thought of that is.
I completely agree with that. I mean, if there's one thing that I think this whiteness film is going to illuminate, is that white people don't like being called white. It's been really actually interesting. We had this one moment where we had a group of young white women say, I don't like being called white girl. I don't like being the basic white girl. I never knew what that term was because I'm kind of old now, I guess. I didn't know what basic meant. Is basic different from ratchet? Like, I don't know. Like, I don't, right? I don't know. But we've been having, during the filming, we've been having these Greek choruses where basically we say, hey, Jose Antonio Vargas, this, undocumented immigrant, sometimes an illegal alien, they say in the newspaper, is in town to talk about white people. Come. So then people come. Thankfully, it hasn't gotten dangerous or anything. But it's been really fascinating because we get really different groups of people. And I remember one time, this young white woman, because I asked questions. I asked, what are the disadvantages of being white? I really want to know, what are the disadvantages of being white? And this young white woman said, it's either you're white trash or you're successful. And that's really stressful, she says. That she has to be successful because people think white people are they have education, they do well, and if you're not that, then you're white trash. So she doesn't like that. Another young white woman said that sometimes she's afraid to speak up because if she says something, then she's going to get called out. And then she starts kind of crying. And this black woman says, no, just say it. I would rather you just say it than not say it. Right? And then, at another thing in Arizona, we followed a young woman who feels that she did not get scholarships to go to college because people like me keeps taking the scholarship money away. Which is I have to tell you, it's a very prevalent assumption. MTV did a study that said that out of all the young white Americans that they interviewed, 90% of young white Americans feel they're as much a victim of racism as people of color are. Right? So it's really important for us to understand, again, why do people feel that way? So I met this woman, hung out with her for a couple of days. We walked through the admission process of applying to college. We actually present, facts, right? And on camera, she realizes that she may be wrong. And at one point, one of her friends, who's a person of color, because she says, this is so not fair. And her friend, who's a person of color, said, life's not fair? Welcome. Welcome to the club, right? So but it was a real, it was a real test of empathy, right? And for me, you cannot have a conversation about race in America without unpacking and dissecting what whiteness in America is, right? That's where we are now. And I feel like, how do we have this conversation without calling anybody racist? How do we have this conversation without making white people feel like, they have to read Howard Zinn and they're guilty for everything that's ever happened in the history of the world? How do we do that? I don't know. But I feel like it only starts with open dialogue. You know what they say, all of the reporters say that we're in post-racial America and stuff? The racial conversation just started. And unless we actually talk to each other, we're looking at a really difficult few years. So that's why whiteness to me is such an important topic. Yes.
Hi, my name is Pamela. I'm from Florida International University.
Oh, that's where Mr. Obama was, the president.
Yeah,
was there.
a few days ago talking about immigration, actually. Yeah. There's snipers on the roof. So what I wanted to bring up and ask you has to do with teachers, as we are in the education school. So I thought it was relevant. So, coming from Dominican Republic, being little and being raised in a house where your mother's working 2-3 jobs, and you're 11 and you're working a job, and then you're raising your little sister because your mom is an illegal immigrant, so she has to work, 2-3 in the morning where they don't seek her and they don't take her away. School was never a big priority for me because life, right?
Yeah.
I was 11 years old. There was nobody in the house besides my mother, myself, and a baby who could do nothing. So I thought about how to pay the bills also. My mom couldn't read English, so I had to learn how to do taxes. I had to learn how to pay the bills when I was 11. So school was whatever, right? It's free anyways when you're in middle school and high school, so why bother? But when I got to 5th grade, I had a teacher that pushed me. Just, always pushing me, always seeing what was the positive, always calling me out on the negative. And I can honestly say later that she is, like you said, she's the first person I call whenever something happens. She's the first person that I ask for advice. She's that one person that made this a reality for me to be standing up here. This is not something I ever dreamed of in this university. So I wanted to ask you, with things that are this relevant, with these issues that we're talking about, how do you think that teachers should be more implemented into these conversations? I mean, we see so many problems with like books being banned and professors being fired because they want to teach African American Black History Month. So how do you think teachers should be implemented into these conversations at all levels, not just university, but the lower levels?
I think they're at the heart of the entire conversation. I think they must be at the heart of the entire conversation. I'm really proud to say, by the way, because films come and go, so documented to Netflix, whatever. What I'm most proud of about documented is we have developed a high school curriculum where teachers can actually use the film to talk about immigration in a non-political way. We teamed up with the Southern Poverty Law Center and the National Council for the Social Studies to develop the curriculum, and it's being piloted now. We just heard that a police department in Long Island, you know that clip that I showed you from Alabama? They're showing that to train cops how to understand immigration and who undocumented people are. So I'm really proud of that. Our challenge right now, Ryan, can you stand up? Ryan Eller is the executive director of Define American. Right now, our big challenge is how do we get this whiteness film that's about to drop on people's heads, how do we make this a resource for teachers to talk about race in their classrooms? For me, and at Define American, the woman, the principal, she's actually one of our board members. Educators for me are at the heart of the conversation because of my own story, but also I think they can get this story out of the political box that it's in, right? So that's why. The second thing I have to say is this idea again of allies. Can you imagine what would happen if every teacher in this country who's ever mentored an undocumented student came out about that? In the same way, what would happen if every person who's ever hired and unknowingly hired an undocumented person said, oh yeah, I hire undocumented people? Can you imagine if they came out too? So that's why, for us, it's really, really important. Thanks.
Hi. I sort of have two brief questions, and I'm not sure if I'm allowed to ask two questions.
I think you are.
Okay. So I'm not American.
Oh, what you should have looked at her. Is she okay? Two questions? Oh, great.
Okay.
She's fine.
Yeah, so I'm not actually American. I immigrated to Canada when I was 9 from South Korea. But I still notice sort of like two general trends when it comes to racial discrimination. One is that we sort of tend to tolerate the stereotypes and sort of humor it when we find that it comes to like affect us emotionally. And the other is that we sort of harbor like the hatred or like the anger that we get from those stereotypes, and we inflict it on other groups that we find vulnerable. So like you're discriminated against, so you discriminate against others.
Yes.
I think it's like a tendency. So what do you have, what sort of advice or like what would you say to youth, especially youth who are kind of like subject to that?
Oh gosh. Man, can somebody answer that? I'm not a PhD. I'm not a graduate student at this school. Well, I guess for me, again, this idea of empathy and diversity study I think is so important, right? And more than that, trying to figure out the root, as you said, you're totally right. People who discriminate are the ones who are getting discriminated against, right? For me, I'm looking at as somebody who's also Asian, the conversation about racism within the Asian community, that's some deep shit. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And we don't know how to talk about it, right? Especially now that you're hearing these things about Asian students suing because there's too many Asian students at college campuses. That is like a time bomb waiting to just explode. I've had a couple of uncomfortable conversations with my own Asian American friends who were like, I don't understand why my son can't get in because these other people. What other people? I'm sorry, what? You live in the United Republic of Berkeley? What are you talking about? What do you mean these other people? Right? Then it got really uncomfortable. And really, I mean, you know, I love Harvard. I think it's great. I think it's great that you all are here, that you got here, that you're smart enough to be here, but it's not the center of the world, right? It doesn't mean if you don't get to Harvard that you're educated, right? So it's okay to not go to Harvard. Although the dean, I'm sure, the dean is looking at me. I'm like, yes, you should go to this school. But I'm just saying, it is not the end of the world. You know, and you're looking at somebody who, when I had choices, I didn't really have a choice. I thought I was actually going to major. My idol growing up was Mike Nichols. I wanted to be like a theater director. So I thought I was going to go to NYU. Then I figured out that I was undocumented and there was no scholarships around. So I'm like, okay, I guess I'm going to go to this thing called SF State. Ended up being the best decision I made, you know? And I think education is really what you make of it. But to your point about racism and discrimination, I mean, that's tough, especially within our communities. And I think it has to start, and it always must, with conversations. I don't think we have enough of those. I can't tell you, by the way, you said you're South Korean?
Yeah.
How many undocumented Korean students I meet who literally shake, right? Because their families don't talk about it at all. I realized when I was living in New York, I was like, why am I not getting billed for my dry cleaning? And then I confronted the woman finally, and she said, oh, my brother doesn't have papers either. Oh my God, I can help you. Shh, no. Free dry cleaning. So I just got the free dry cleaning because she likes what I'm doing. She saw me on TV, but she doesn't want me to help her to get her brother figured out, right? Because she said, it's okay, we have our business, we're fine. I'm like, what, you know? So I think a lot of it starts with conversations. And I think, frankly, as educators, I hope that we really have to figure out how we can have these conversations as early as possible, right? I think middle school, frankly. I mean, yeah. So how many other questions can I take, ma'am? I do. Great. Yes, 10 more minutes.
Hi, my name is Genesis Fonseca, and I'm a first-year PhD student here in American Studies. And my mother is undocumented, still is, and that has been a big secret, I guess, for me as well growing up, something I don't share with a lot of people until very recently. And so I wanted to learn more about your own process of when you decided it was okay to share. But more importantly, I think we've been talking a lot about how we share our story and why we share our story, but I'm also very interested in who we share our story with. So, for instance, you're sharing your story here at Harvard. Where else do you think it's important to share your story? But going back to just, you know, what made it a safe space for you to share your story?
Would your mom qualify for the extended
she would
DAPA?
if that all goes well, because she's been here since she was 17. She's now 42.
Oh my gosh.
And she hasn't had papers since,
So that's why hopefully we figure out what's going to happen with the president's executive actions. So it was either someone was going to out me or I was going to out myself. I always knew that. And I have to say that this is going to sound really weird, but actually interviewing Mark Zuckerberg was a big turning point for me. Since I was a kid, I thought that if you wanted to be a serious writer, if you wanted to be considered like an actual credible journalist, you had to write for this thing called The New Yorker. So when I finally got the assignment to profile Zuckerberg, I was like, oh man, like, I've made it, you know? And I remember I first heard of The New Yorker when I was a kid in the Bay Area. We went to this thing called Andronikos. It's like the more expensive version of Whole Foods. And I saw like 5 women waiting in the line clutching The New Yorker. And I remember going to the public library and seeing The New Yorker and then opening it up and being so incredibly confused. Like, I didn't understand any of the cartoons. They were supposed to be funny. And, you know, irony wasn't a part of my definition. I didn't know what ironic was. You know, there's just tragic. I don't know what ironic is. So, but ever since I was a kid, I was like, okay, I have to write for this thing where they use like $20 words. So here I am now, I'm writing for The New Yorker, I'm interviewing Mark Zuckerberg, I'm asking him really uncomfortable questions like, hey, did you really steal the idea from the wink of eye? Like, you know, that, right? What do you really want from us? I mean, some really uncomfortable questions. And then Mark, who's actually a really social guy, he's not that movie. and they're like, we can't let you, I was a liar. I lied about my status, right? So the editor was going to assign a reporter to write about me. I'm like, no, I can write my own story, right? And he was like, oh, but how can we trust you? And I'm like, well, you're just going to have to. And then when I wrote it for them, they killed it. It went to the New York Times. But to me, telling the story is a way to liberate other people from their own stories, right? A good story to me is a story so specific it's universal. I'm really proud to say at Define American this week, a young woman, after she read my New York Times story and saw it documented, she spent years as an investment banker in Goldman Sachs. I don't know if you heard about the story. An undocumented Mexican woman rose up as a VP at Goldman Sachs, undocumented. She read my essay and saw the film, and she basically stalked me. And she said, I need to work for Define American. I'm like, yes! So she's our development director, and this week she outed herself on Bloomberg Business Week. One story at a time. But it's not only about journalists and investment bankers, it's about the stories that we don't hear about, right? I'm starting a series right now about undocumented labor workers in LA. Chris Rock gave an interview to Hollywood Reporter that said that in LA is a slave state, and Mexicans run it as slaves. From Chris Rock. So that kind of was inspiring to me to kind of figure out like the underbelly of LA and all the undocumented workers, the nannies, the housekeepers, right, that make LA what it is. So it can't just be about investment bankers and journalists. It has to be about everybody. That's why.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yes, sir.
Hey, so I'm also going to, my name is Greg. I'm from the higher ed program, and I'm going to take the two-part question route really fast, though.
Okay, cool.
And I'll be quick. So the first thing was you mentioned that story about Hillary Clinton.
Yes.
And it seems just like we have a pretty broken political system. I wonder where you stood on, we can affect all these changes kind of outside the political arena, but at some point it seems like something needs to happen there. Where do we go? What are your thoughts? I don't know.
Oh,
and
man. Secondly,
you've been such a great storyteller, and the dialogue has just been incredible. I was hoping you'd share with us like one story about somewhere you've been with a back and forth you've had with anybody, or some story or dialogue that you haven't shared in any of your pieces of art.
The first thing, can you imagine that so George W. Bush happened, and the pendulum swung completely to the other side, that it's Barack Hussein Obama, right? And they're exactly in the same spot. How did that happen? If that doesn't expose to you just how broken this two-party system is, I don't think anything ever will. I find it really interesting that they just announced that the Koch brothers, am I pronouncing it right?
Koch brothers.
Coke. Like Coca-Cola?
Yeah.
God, I've been mispronouncing. I'm like an immigrant. I've been mispronouncing it wrong for like the past year. Nobody bothered to correct me. Coke,
It's
the
okay.
Pepsi
You're
brothers.
safe here. You're safe here.
The Coke brothers. You hear that thing that they're spending $1 billion? $1 billion for what again? Oh, for advertising. To do what? Oh, to reach us. Does it really cost $1 billion to reach us? I guess. And reach us about what? I mean, Lawrence Lessig, who's been fighting this fight about campaign finance reform for years now, and no one wants to pay attention to him. I feel like it's going to take an entire revolution, right, for people to realize that we got to figure out how we get money out of our political system. I think that's at the root of it, right? And I got to tell you, by the way, because I covered Hillary for a few months when it was between Hillary and Barack Obama for the nomination. I can't even begin to explain to you the level of sexism that was so blatant in the campaign trail towards this woman, right? She didn't really help herself because of the staffers that she had I just want to she's like a Sondheim musical waiting to happen, I just want the real Hillary Clinton to stand up. Maybe Kanye can help her. I don't know. We need to figure this out, Hillary. If you really want to win, we got to know who you are, right? So that's my Hillary thing. Your second point. The Confederate flag. We did an event in North Carolina, and a 6-year Army vet came, white guy. Behind him was a black woman. And he started talking about the fact that he has a Confederate flag at home. But that's because he said he's from the South. And to him, the Confederate flag is part of his history. The black woman behind gets visibly upset. So, of course, being who I am, I started trying to get a dialogue going. She was like, I don't understand how you don't know what that means to us. Right? It's very painful, she says. The man turns around, looks her in the eye, and says, I don't mean to hurt you. This is not what this is about. And then they lock eyes. And if only that could happen, for me at least, at that moment, it was enough. Anais Nin said, we don't see things as they are. We see things as we are. Right? So that moment between those two people, just acknowledging each other as human beings, right? They may not agree, but at least trying to understand where they're coming from. And, you know, I have to tell you too, like, I can't wait for that to air on television because we captured it. The last thing I want to say about this is, here I am going to Alabama, Georgia, North Carolina, talking about, you know, Asian-looking guy with a Latino name who's gay, right? Immigration. And I go to Alabama for a month, and I'm like, oh my God, they're barely over the black and white thing, and I'm adding this Latino nation thing like right on top of it. And I'm like, oh man, we're really screwed. So for me, that's the complexity of it now. You know, I went to University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa, where I remember meeting a white woman who started flipping out. I give a talk, she approached me and she's like shaking. She said, I don't really know how to talk to my sorority sisters. It's a big sorority, right? She said that they won't let her friend in, but she's afraid that if she says anything, you know, she may get in trouble and she may get kicked out of the sorority. And I'm like, oh, and I'm thinking in my head, oh my God, maybe the friend is an undocumented Latina or Asian. The friend is half black. She might be Halle Berry for all we know. And they won't let her in 2013 in Alabama. So, man, it's gonna really take a village to quote Hillary Clinton. But last question. Yes? Yeah, last question. Yes, sir.
Thank you so much for your words today. I really appreciate it. And I was sitting back there and I had one of the aha moments, like, wow, he really dropped something on me, because I was sitting back there and you asked the question about, you know, what do we picture when we picture undocumented people? And I immediately went to the picture in my mind, but then you said, you know, a number of other ethnicities and backgrounds that are included in that. And you continued on to say we cannot separate out the conversation about undocumented people and race. It has to be a conversation had together, if I interpreted that correctly.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Well, not fantastic, but it's fantastic that I interpreted it correctly. And so my question is for you is and you talk about being a walking uncomfortable conversation. I resonated with that a lot. And so my question is approaching that conversation and when talking about ed reform. Because when we say ed reform, you know, we know who we're talking about. And and race is foundational, and race is very central to talking about education reform. And I also understood from what you said, we have to not, you know, turn people off to the conversation, but bring people in.
Yeah.
And for those of us who are students and would like to push the conversation forward and bring us all together, how do you approach audiences that may not be able to see what you see in a proactive manner?
I do Bill O'Reilly because I really enjoy getting the emails from his viewers, right? I don't do Bill O'Reilly because I enjoy being a punching bag. You know, I do Bill O'Reilly because I care not about Bill O'Reilly, but the 3 million people who watch Bill O'Reilly every night. 3 million people. Rachel Maddow is lucky if she cracks 800,000 a night. Bill O'Reilly's averaging 3 million people, including the Falkland Wars thing that he's going through right now. I guess I feel like the greatest gift journalism ever gave me was empathy. You know, being able to talk to people who may not agree, who I may not agree with, but trying to understand why they think what they think. To your question, I feel like too often, and I might get booed, so it's okay if you boo me. I think too often when we talk about diversity in this country and in many, many topics, I know in newsrooms this happens a lot, we don't include white people in the conversation. Too often diversity conversations means people of color getting around in the room, right? And we don't open it up and like say, okay, white people, what's up, right? I know this is my own experience. I don't know about, but me, that's been my experience. And so for me, being inclusive in that way is really important. For me, at least, I'm not privileged enough to be a Republican or a Democrat, so I make it a point to really try to be as inclusive as possible politically, right? Like I try not to get political with people. Although, of course, as you can hear me talk, I'm pretty aware of how these dots connect. But I try to get it out of this, oh, those Republicans. I try really hard. Sometimes I don't succeed, but I try, right? So to me, those are really important. But most specifically to your question, I was really lucky that that woman, Pat Hyland, she basically raised me. She was a pioneer in the education world because back in 1999, she did open enrollment in high school. She said, any student that wants to take AP and honors classes can take them. I was too young to understand what exactly she did, but I remember, because I was a student board representative, right? I would listen to these parents, mostly Asian parents and white parents, come to this school board meeting and say, you can't open up enrollment. Well, these kids are gonna come and they're gonna lower the standards. And I'm like, I remember looking once, going to Pat, because we were like in the big office, and I'm like, when they say they, like who are they exactly talking about? She's like, oh, okay. Why do we use code words that aren't really code words? Right? When people say like underprivileged children, like who are you really talking about? And why are they underprivileged? And what is your role in that underprivilegedness? And that's why I keep going back to this idea of minorities, right? I am not a minority, yo. I'm a majority of one, and so are you. And I think we are now getting to the point where we actually have to think to look at each other that way, you know? To look at each other that way. And this idea of not facing the facts and not facing ourselves, I think has a lot to do with why the education reform. I had this really uncomfortable conversation with a person I'm not going to name, but with a rich person who's been throwing money on education reform, like millions of money, thinking that the millions of money is going to solve a question that they don't want to talk about, which is race. Yeah. What does race and family separate, what does that have to do with how students learn, right? No amount of school testing is going to solve that, man. And, you know, so for me, it's kind of unpack it and take these like words away and really get really direct with people about what we're talking about. I think that's the solution. So thank you. I think I'm done. Thank you so much again for coming. Thank you.
So thank you once again to Mr. Vargas for really honoring other narratives and expanding our understanding of what it means to define American. I want to invite all of you guys to a reception in honor of Mr. Vargas over in Gutman Conference Center. It's the ground floor of Gutman right across the hall. Thank you once more again. I'm tumbling over my words, but thank you.